afternoon. Welcome to our show. I'm your host, Melissa Ridgen, and for the second week in a row, the show is entirely dedicated to child welfare. It's part of a two-week perspective series we here at APTN News are doing. Our reporters have been working for months on stories about a system that employs a lot of our people but is destroying a lot of lives too. We are putting those people in focus today. On tap, a Dakota woman who was thrilled to finally become a mom, only to be escorted by 3 security guards from a Brandon, Manitoba hospital without her 2-day-old baby. After what she says was a misunderstanding, but now she and her partner feel like the child welfare workers, instead of admitting that they overreacted, are working hard to create a narrative to keep the baby. We hear from a Calgary mom who keeps submitting, who has kept submitting to parental assessments, all of which the child welfare agency that she is using refused to accept because they say that she's not unfit to parent. So they just keep ordering new assessments. She's done 4, and plot twist is herself taking courses to one day work with youth in care. She's going to join us. Also joining us, a longtime foster mom who may never foster again because of the, quote, chaos and gaslighting and other antics that child welfare inflicts on people. She has a lot of what she has to say sounds a whole lot like what parents have been long saying about this system. And we hear from researchers who say there is now solid evidence that shows the disastrous effect it has on when children are taken from women. This was, of course, made clear in the MMIW National Inquiry report, yet here we all are still navel-gazing and taking kids without regard for what it does to these mothers. We want you to join our conversation. Our phone lines are open. You can call us toll-free at 1-877-647-2786, but you need to remember that you cannot identify anybody who is currently involved in the child welfare system. That includes yourself. Before I introduce you to our guests, I want to share with you how one Northwestern Ontario city's homeless problem is deeply rooted in the child welfare system. Here's Kenneth Jackson with that.
There's always a few sitting at this spot. You walk by them every day. Maybe try not to look them in the eyes. And there's more by the beer store. It's early in the morning and they're waiting for it to open. There's a child in each of them. Can you see it? One destroyed by the child welfare system that plays out on the streets of Kenora every day. And no one knows that more than this guy.
The impact of that. We're the ripple effect, so to say. So we're going to go to those places and get drunk, get high, do what everybody's doing just to cope, right?
Levan speaks from experience. He used to live on these streets. Jory Smith still does. Both took APTN around Kenora in September to show us how the child welfare system feeds the streets.
I see a nation that's suffering, and I see it just being ignored, pretty much. Like there's a vicious cycle. A lot of these youths who are, just turning 18, they're no longer part of the system. They end up just, carrying on.
As Smith speaks, a group of young guys walk by. He knows them from jail and foster care, especially the guy in black and yellow.
That one guy was sponsored by like DC, Crown Royal. He was a pro snowboarder, and
one of those guys right there?
Yeah, the guy in the yellow.
He's a pro snowboarder?
Pro snowboarder, and
you saw that phone him walking away?
He's a alcoholic now, And
we keep on our walk around Kenora. Signs of child welfare are everywhere. I asked him about the local jail.
This is going to be a perfect example. The jail is about 95% Aboriginal, but the staff is only 2% Aboriginal. So that kind of just paints a picture of the town, right? It's like an old boys club.
As we keep going, it's become clear racism is also at play here. So much so that City Council talked about passing an anti-loitering bylaw. And if you haven't guessed by now, most of the homeless people are First Nations.
I wouldn't say so much it was the mayor that called for that. I would say it's the people in this town, and that's where the racism still stays. Is the actual people in this town that believe so much into creating. Oh, it's such a nice city. It's such a nice town.
So we keep going on our walk of pretty Kenora. We stop near a farmer's market. Smith then explains how policing in this city changed a few years ago.
The difference I noticed between the Kenora police and OPP is the Kenora police might rough you up real good, but you might leave without getting charged. The OPP does everything according to plan, but then, there's ridiculous charges.
Then we hear some of that Kenora charm, as Smith explains how homeless people keep getting charged with minor offenses.
There's people that have been in the system for almost 10 years now because they keep getting that breach because they don't, they don't know any better than to just continue on with life, right? And that was someone who's probably ignorant.
Soon we meet another person. She knows the streets well. She also knows addiction.
My name is Miranda Elder. I'm from Kenora. I left for a while to Thunder Bay and Sault Ste. Marie, but I've lived here most of my life. And I have a different perspective on things because I went to school for social work and then became an IV drug user.
That means she knows who lives on the streets.
How do you see child welfare play out on the streets of Kenora?
I just see the same thing happening over and over again. I see families, like people are being placed with families that are worse by far than their actual family.
She estimates at least 3/4 of people on the street come from the child welfare system. We are near the end of our walk when we run into a group of people. I can spot the self-harming on the arm of the young girl in the middle. She's quiet and doesn't want to say much, so her friend does the talking.
It's not fair, man, because it's hard to find a place to live, right?
No, it's not fair. If you survive a child welfare system, you may end up here in Kenora with no place to go except the streets or jail.
Shifting gears to my first guest, November 21st was supposed to be an extra special birthday for a Sioux Valley Dakota Nation woman. She went into labor and she and her partner happily spent her birthday at the Brandon Regional Hospital where they were eager to meet their first child. But as babies often are, he wasn't ready. She was in labor for 3 days before the baby boy finally arrived on November 24th, happy and healthy. Their joy, though, was soon replaced by shock and horror. While Mom had stepped out of the room, Dad was rocking his fussy newborn, and a nurse says that she overheard him use unsafe language. Going on no sleep for 4 days, Dad, while rocking the baby to calm him, used the word shake instead of rock or bounce. He tried to explain that, but it wasn't enough, and child welfare officials showed up with 3 security guards to take the baby and escort the parents from the hospital. I got to speak to the mother involved in this earlier this week. Thanks for joining us. You know, leaving that hospital without a baby you'd been eagerly awaiting for 9 months. How did you feel? I mean, you were fully set up for this baby to come home and never anticipated something like this would happen. How did it feel to go home empty-handed?
Devastating, absolutely devastating. This is probably the biggest battle I've ever had in my life. There are no words for, no one prepares you for something like that. No one prepares you for having something that you've nurtured for 9 months to be suddenly taken away due to a allegation, whether or not that happened, that was deemed risky.
Like, you know, there's apparently the word that what had happened was Dad was, you know, bouncing the baby, and it's like, you know, Dad's got you, Dad's shaking you, something to that effect is what they say happened. Dad says, I don't remember saying anything like that. You know, 3 days of no sleep. You know, and he'd be saying, you know, if that's something that I actually said, that certainly wasn't what I mean. Like, I'm holding and bouncing this baby, trying to calm him down. You know, do you think that what was said, does that justify the apprehension? And we're on what, day 11? Your baby's, you know, it was almost 2 weeks old, and they still have your baby in care. Do you feel that what may have been said justifies the actions that have come on the heels of that?
I believe that I think it's correct that it was right of them to notify CFS if they believed that there was a risk, considering that, you know, they had no context for the extreme labor that we went through, plus my common law partner being ADHD and the 38 plus hours of labor. I understand that nurse on a 12-hour shift can only understand so much. I do not believe it warranted such an extreme reaction of apprehending our child.
So, you know, you'd mentioned me too. So since this apprehension happened, CFS has been starting to slowly compile information, including that your partner has ADHD. They have said that you suffered from depression many years ago. So they're saying that that's now something that they can use to justify keeping the child. Do you feel that now, like once they have your baby, there was more of an effort to create a case to keep the baby than as opposed to an effort to get the baby reunited, and you guys set up in a, you know, some sort of a supportive system that would appease their concerns but also get the family back together.
When they gave us the verbal request of having a safety plan in place, they more or less said that they wanted us to find a friend or family member during this time in Code Red here in Manitoba. We could not find someone to immediately come into our home within 24 hours. So when they showed up the very next day, trying to explain that, yes, we already had a network of professionals in place to help us, whether that was medically related, mental health related, personal worker related. They ignored all that, and their answer was apprehend our child.
You know, you had said the effect of this, you feel like you could see how this would have a devastating effect on some women's mental health. Explain sort of your thoughts on that.
Like we discussed, I do have a history of mental health. There was no concern throughout the entire pregnancy. He was only 4 days short of being full term. There was no concern from my psychiatrist, mental health counselor, family doctor, even from his own worker. There was no cause for concern whatsoever. Everybody knew we were expecting this. He was very much wanted. Even in the hospital, we were very attentive to him. And for this to happen, for it to escalate to such an extreme degree, it's weighing on my mind every day. Every minute I in my arms, I'm wondering how he's doing. How is he doing out there during this time of COVID?
Your baby, you had planned to breastfeed, of course, and you know, he's almost 2 weeks old, and you're seeing him, you know, a few hours every week. You're seeing him at the child welfare office, in the office there with your partner, with a social worker monitoring all of this. He's no longer breastfed, is he?
No, not at this point. When they apprehended him, and I'm sorry to share too much information, my breast milk did not come in yet until the following Sunday. And I ended up getting an infection because I could not get the milk within. So that also hampered my breastfeeding efforts. This past week, I only saw him for 5 hours, and that's not enough time to create a meaningful bond, even for breastfeeding.
You know, people have said, you know, you should have had this recorded. You should have grabbed your phone. You guys were escorted out by 3 security guards as a child welfare worker zipped away with your newborn. What's the response that you have to not having this all on video?
The minute they said that, there was a very real possibility of being apprehended, me and my partner broke down. We were struck by overwhelming grief that this was happening. We were bawling, we were crying. My partner was almost inconsolable. There was no time to think about whipping out a phone.
Right.
There were a nurse in the room, 2 social workers, and then the CFS worker came into the room, followed by 3 security guards. We were escorted to a conference room where the security guards looked over us as they packed their bags up. And when it was all said and done, he was apprehended at 11:30 a.m.
You've now proactively gone and had 12 support letters written for you that you've submitted to the agency, including, like you said, family doctors, psychiatrists, people who you've known who have had no problem with the fact that you, and you actually mentioned you're in your late 30s. This isn't like a 19-year-old who's, you know, embarking on motherhood for the first time. You know, you're not a young, inexperienced woman. We're prepared to have this baby. You have no cause, I guess, for concern about you guys having the baby. Has that had any impact on the child welfare officials? They have all these letters now saying, look, we don't have concerns whatsoever about the capacity to look after this child. Has that worked for you? Has it had any impact?
As far as I know, I'm forwarding documents, letters of support to them from our professional workers, and that includes our family doctor. and any other letters of support I forwarded to them. I'm not sure how much stock they're taking into our background regarding our extensive network of support, so 12 plus workers and agencies. I'm not sure that they're actually looking at that. At this point, it feels like what is their end goal right now? You know, we were already prepared to begin with. The focus was not on myself to begin with. At first, you wanted someone to move into your home. That couldn't happen. And even if I did have someone into my home, would you still put me through the hoops?
Yeah. What would you like to see happen from this point on?
I want him home for Christmas. You know, my labor started on the 21st of November, my birthday, and then I had him on the 24th. Christmas is not too far away. I don't believe I should have to wait that long for him. There's no reason to separate mother and baby, especially if the focus was on my partner.
Have you been given a timeline?
No timelines have been given. As far as I know, they may apply to hold him for 3 months or 6 months or how long. Who knows how long.
Well, Mom, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today and keep us posted as to how this all goes. I'm sure people watching at home will want to know the outcome of this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
As mentioned, I spoke with her earlier this week. We did, of course, reach out to Child and Family Services of Western Manitoba, who has her baby. In an emailed statement, Chief Executive Officer Arlene Stewart said that apprehending a child is a very difficult decision and is done only as a last resort and when, as required, when safety cannot be assured. When a child is brought into care, the agency immediately starts working with parents towards reunification and what might be required to eliminate any safety concerns. In order for a child to be returned home safely, we emphasize to the parents that the behaviors we need to work with them on to ensure child safety. Others in the Parents Network and personal and professional supports may play a role in helping parents create the necessary changes that would allow a child to return to a parent's care safely. Ms. Stewart says there can't be a blanket timeline for returning a child. It only happens when the agency is positive that the child is safe. And therein lies some of the controversy, parents saying that the children are safe versus an agency saying that a child is safe. There's a very large gap in between. Okay, so let's go now to a Calgary mom. Her name is Shauna. She has 2 daughters in child welfare custody. I'm going to try to stop saying care because, as many people point out, that word gives too much credit to a system where it's often not even true. Her girls are 3 and 8. Child welfare officials made her see 2 professionals for a parental assessment, curious about her mental stability. When they didn't get the answers that they wanted in the report, they sent her to 2 others. Despite not getting the outcome they wanted from these assessments, her caseworker continues to label Shauna as mentally unfit and works to build a case against her to take to a judge looking for permanent custody of the girls. Now, here's an interesting plot twist. Shauna is studying to be a youth care worker herself. She's a straight-A student, and she joins us from Calgary.
Hello.
Hey, Shauna. Thanks for taking time to chat with us about this. Let's just start with how CFS became involved in your life. You have, I guess they're called disabilities. It's challenges. As do your daughters. So you had reached out looking for services. Is that kind of the gist of it?
Yes. My daughter was trying on stimulant medication, and every single one that she tried made her have more aggressive, violent episodes. And we were waiting to get into the complex ADHD clinic, and it was a 6-month wait. So I went into the Children's Hospital to see if we could speed up the time to get her in quicker. While I was out in the hallway, one of the nurses went up to a group of other women and started telling them how she didn't see something adding up and was calling Child Family Services. I had no clue she was speaking about me because why would that be done publicly and in front of me?
So the day that they came, CFS comes snooping around to investigate what this nurse says. They come to your house, they find it messy, and they take your kids. Is that right?
They actually took them a month later from a completely clean house because Families with Children with Disabilities was giving me funding to help support me in my home, and I'd hired a cleaning lady, and my daughter was off stimulants. When they first showed up, my house was a disaster because of the violent episodes, but it was no longer the case when they stole my children.
So you've provided me with a lot of documentation to support what you're saying is happening. We have one of the assessments, and I really liked this portion where the assessor says that you are ridiculously smart, and that actually ended up being used against you, along with dyslexia as proof of somehow that you can't parent. And I wanted to say, I mean, that to me floored me, because we've actually done stories here on InFocus with parents not having their children because they say in these assessments, oh, you're not smart enough. In fact, one woman, it said in her assessment, she can't do long division, so she can't parent. And I'm not making that up. You can go to our website, aptnnews.ca/InFocus. You can find, there's a story on there where you can see this. I'm not making it up. How do you get your head around something that it's like you're too high functioning, and that's being used to keep your kids from you?
In their mind, it's me being uncooperative and thinking I know better, yet I'm quoting professionals like Daniel Siegel and Kim Payne and the Institution of Child Psychology that follows both Kim Payne and Daniel Siegel. I was even part of his group where he does a meetup every Friday. Daniel Siegel does, with multiple people around the world, teaching them different strategies on parenting or even mentally functioning.
You've sent me certificates of completion for a boatload of classes too, so just remind everybody what exactly it is that you're studying. You're taking a whole bunch of classes and forums and whatnot.
Yes. So right now I'm studying child youth service worker, but I plan to continue my education in university, but I'm also in multiple community resource groups to learn by the people also. I want to create what I call a safeguard system to ensure the safety and rights of children and families within the system, and I also want to become a psychologist.
Something that struck me from an excerpt of your file, wherein they outline, this Calgary CFS agency outlines why you can't be a mom. They had said that you have no connection to the children's dad, and they said that you have no role model. I think we have a list of things that they had said. If we can see that on the screen, maybe not. This is a blast from the past. I think we have it here. Yes, this is it. So here's why you can't parent, Shauna. You have dyslexia. You've got some learning disabilities. You had past trauma. Your kids have disabilities. You lack an ongoing connection to the kids' fathers, and there's not a positive role model in your life for these girls. I mean, that just reeks of 50s type BS. When you look at this, what's your response to that? This is insanity.
There's many different responses on that. One of them was the fact that my youngest daughter's father and we actually had to screenshot a conversation with the team lead and him just so we could get the no contact order that they claimed wasn't on him so that he could have access to the girls. On top of that, not only does that attack all single parents out there, it enforces the belief that only cisgender and heterosexual families are allowed. Yeah. As a member of the LGBT community, and many of my friends and family being part of this community, it's a violation of our human rights and dignity.
Shauna, I thank you for taking the time to share this with us. I mean, if it can happen to you, it can happen to anybody, I think is what the takeaway of this is. You keep us posted as to how this is going. This is something we, of course, want to follow and see. Hopefully you get your kids back. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we have to take a break, but still ahead, how stealing children is killing our women.
So what we found was among about 700 mothers that we interviewed and surveyed, 40% reported having had a child removed from their care by the state, which is really unacceptably high. And then of those women, in a sort of separate question, we found also really high rates of overdose.
Join our conversation now. Call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like us on Facebook on our APTN News page. Follow or tweet us at APTN InFocus. And send your thoughts to infocus@aptn.ca.
Welcome back. Let's go to social media now with our social media editor, Jesse Andrushko, to hear what some of you are saying about today's topic.
Thanks, Melissa. For the past week, we've been sharing stories online about the child welfare system in Canada. On the latest episode of APTN Investigates, Cullen Crozier and Kenneth Jackson look at the story of Sasha Raven-Fall and the failures leading up to her suicide. Let's take a look at some of the feedback we got on that story. Erica said, "Get rid of that system already. If they cared about the kids, they wouldn't put them in worse homes than they were taken from." Megan commented, "As much as the agency was responsible, I believe we failed. Our country has stood quiet on the fact that people are still suffering. The country needs to speak out, say this is not acceptable anymore. If we have failed one child, we have failed every child." From Danielle, "Scrap the whole thing. We all know it doesn't work and never did, and in some cases it was worse." Deanna said, "Racism is so alive and well in Canada. It's attitudes like that that keep everyone in the world down." From Lynn, "I have zero printable words for the horrendous neglect by supposed caregivers and agencies in this story." Missy commented, "If CFS is not going to be accountable for the kids, then send them home to their broken homes where there is a chance that a family member will love them and take care of them." Lastly, from Claudia, "This is such a sad story. It should have never happened. Are we not responsible in some way?" Thank you to all the viewers that shared their comments. If you want to see our perspective series on child welfare or the latest episode of APTN Investigates, The Death Report, visit aptnnews.ca/truthaboutchildwelfare. If you want to share your thoughts on child welfare system in Canada, here's how. Join our conversation now. Call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like us on Facebook on our APTN News page. Follow or tweet us at APTN InFocus. And send your thoughts to infocus@aptn.ca.
I love our APTN audience and your comments. You guys just don't miss a beat. And this is something that's lost on a lot of other people in this country, but not to the APTN viewers. Well, parents often say that they can't win in a system that creates constant chaos, from moving targets to gaslighting by caseworkers to condescension. But our next guest says all of that too about child welfare workers, except for that she's a foster mom. She's not one of the parents that they're taking kids from. Jenny Davies is an educator. She's been fostering in Brandon, Manitoba for 14 years, but she says she might finally be done with that. She joins us now. I'm so happy you could join us, Jenny.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Let's just introduce you to our audience. But when did you become, why did you become a foster mom 14 years ago?
Well, I had always been interested, and then I was actually living up north when I first started fostering on a reserve, and I just mentioned to somebody that worked at the CFS office that I had always been interested, and so I had a child in my house within 10 days or something, and the reason why I was always interested was because I think, when there's kids that need support and their families need support, I saw it as an opportunity to create a bridge. And because I am, most of the kids in care are Indigenous, and I wanted to work with families and with children to as almost like a personal act of reconciliation, like to create that kind of connection and working together.
You'd said that it was harder to adopt a dog than it was to get foster kids.
It was. My first child arrived in my house. They called me and said, "Can you take a kid?" And I said, "Sure, when?" And they said, "Tomorrow." And they literally dropped her off. I think I signed a couple of pieces of paper on my lunch break that day. And then the child was in my house and I had no idea of her background. When I adopted a dog from rescue, I had before they would allow me, I had to fill out a multi-page questionnaire. I had a home visit. I had to have references. And that just didn't happen with CFS. They just call you and say, "Can you take them?" And then all the responsibility is yours, but none of the power.
You've had 11 kids in your care over 14 years, is that right?
Yeah.
And a lot of meaningful relationships, like some of those kids that are grown-ups now, these are kids that are in your life. Still.
Oh, yeah. One of them still lives with me. She's 20 now, and she's graduated from her post-secondary program. She's working up until COVID shutdowns happened here. Her older sister, who also lived with me as a child for a long time, is here right now with her 2 babies. So I have second generation kids that I'm connecting with now. These are my honorary grandchildren.
I'm going to read from a story that's on our website. People, sure. You can go check it out. It's aptnnews.ca. You'll find this story with Jenny. It's compelling. I want to read something out of it. You had described what you experienced in the system, which so many parents also say, you know, the ever-changing hoops, the moving targets, the gaslighting, the lies, the broken promises. You say, quote, they create chaos, they manipulate truths, and when you call them on it, they scramble and they lash out. You're constantly questioned and grilled. Child welfare is not run by terribly healthy people. They will blow things up because they can, because they're having a bad day, whatever. It's sickening. This is we hear this about parents saying it. I think a lot of parents might be shocked to hear foster parents are saying the exact same thing. You know, can you explain some of the frustrations that, you know, and without, you know, mentioning specifics, but some of the more broad strokes of frustrations that you had with the people who work in this industry?
Well, I think one of the, like I said, they drop all the responsibility on the foster parent without really, you know, having a thorough kind of process for making you a foster parent, but then have a really difficult time communicating that they have all the power and make all the decisions. Like even from things as small as the kids are going on a visit and I, you know, like I'm working full time. I have all these kids in my house. And then I'd find out they were actually going on a weekend visit that next day. So, you know, I have to get them all packed up and all of that stuff. And then from things, and then on the other hand, like huge issues, like when I got these kids, they came with 20 hours of respite per child a week. And then that was cut to like less than 10% of that support without any kind of discussion or, you know, asking me if I was agreeable to continue to care for these kids without that kind of support. Because, you know, I have a very demanding career as an educator and it's a lot of work and the kids are a lot of work.
You had provided me with a lot of exchanges between you and several caseworkers, like piles of it, page after page after page. You had to chase them to be reimbursed for out-of-pocket expenses for these children. You were oftentimes told
months at
getting you your money isn't a priority. Their kids had been dropped off by agency workers at a home without the agency worker going in to make sure that there was even an adult present. Left the kids unattended. I mean, people have lost their kids for stuff like that. But if CFS does it, it's like, oh, oopsie, right?
Yeah. I told, like, there was one visit where a worker goes with the kids for visits, and this driver had dropped the kids off, left them alone in the house. They were 2, 4, and 10. Yeah. And, you know, not kids with good judgment. Like they hadn't been with me very long at this point. And, you know, a 2-year-old should never be alone.
No.
Or in any case. And they left them. And then when they couldn't get hold of me, like I was at work and not able to access my cell phone because I'm a teacher. And, you know, they were trying to call me all afternoon. And the guy came back to the house, but he sat outside and left the kids alone inside.
Last
for
question.
Hours.
Last question for you. What has to change for you to, you're currently not fostering with an agency, what would have to change for you to do it again?
It's so foundational. When we think about the purpose of an organization, I think when most Canadians think of Child and Family Services, we think of Child Protective Services and Family Protective Services. And the reason for it to exist, its moral authority is to protect. And because that doesn't happen, I feel like I'm doing more harm than good. I don't want to be part of a system that refuses treatment to mothers when they ask, that, yanks children out of homes without any notice. These kids, I couldn't even tell them where they were going and who was going to be there and if they were going to their schools on the Monday, like nothing.
Yeah.
I didn't have any information, and that is so disruptive and so harmful. And that needs to be taken into account by these people who make these decisions, because we're undermining children's entire sense of who they are and their sense of security in the world. How do you grow up to trust relationships if you live in a happy, caring, loving home, and then the next day it's all over?
Yeah.
And you're somewhere else. And it was just absolutely shocking how that happened. Shocking. And
Jenny,
it's okay for me.
That. We've seen it. We've seen it countless times on the show, the destruction that happens. And seemingly nobody is interested in even acknowledging it's a problem.
No.
Thanks for joining us, Jenny. I got to take a break here. Jenny shares her experience as a foster mom with an in-depth piece that you can read on our website, aptnnews.ca. We'd emailed Rhonda Kelly, the executive director of Southeast CFS, that Jenny was dealing with. We outlined fully what Jenny had to say. We extended an offer for her to join the show. 2 emails, in fact, both of which went unanswered. Okay, so it's time for us to take a break. When we come back, some incredible frontline women whose new 8-year research confirms what we've known all along, that taking children can be deadly to mothers. You don't want to miss it. Stay with us. Welcome back. New research from the Center for Gender and Health and Sexual Equity shows what people have long said anecdotally, that taking a woman's newborn increases her risk of destructive behavior and often even accidental drug overdoses. Megan Chumath and Sophie Pierre are co-authors of this research, and I had the chance to speak with them about their research earlier this week. I'm so glad you could both join us to share the work, this very important work that you both did. I just want you to share with our audience a little bit about your background so they know where this comes from. Sophie, I'll start with you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Gdunecha from southeastern British Columbia. My name is Gunganus Klam. I was chief in my community for 26 years and served on council for 30. I ended my career in 2015 after having served 6 years as the BC Treaty Commission Chief Commissioner. So that's my background. And from the time that I retired, I went on to the Trudeau Foundation as a mentor. And I was very fortunate to be introduced to and to have the opportunity to work with Megan. She was already well into her research by that point, but the more I heard about it, the more I realized just the importance and it was something that I definitely could participate in with her.
Megan, give us a little bit about your background. How this research come to be? What drew you to be interested in this?
Yeah, thanks for that. Very blessed to have worked for many years as a street nurse in the inner city in Vancouver, primarily in the downtown east side, but also throughout the province and a little bit throughout the country, and working with women primarily who use drugs and in HIV and other key areas like that, and was very drawn to the injustices related to the child welfare system. So finding women that were really from no fault of their own, because society hadn't provided necessarily the resources they needed, primarily around poverty and homelessness, and then their children were being removed. And I just felt like that was a huge human right abuse and something that I wanted to work on for my PhD.
And this is work that takes, I believe, 8 years of data. Can you share with us, how this research came to be?
Yeah. So there's a group that I partnered with called the Center for Gender and Sexual Health Equity at the University of British Columbia, and they have a ton of community partnerships. So through the leadership of many women in Indigenous communities and elders and leaders, they look at issues that impact women's health. And so this part, I was able to join with that group in order to really investigate what is the impact on child custody loss on women's health. It was something we saw clinically all the time in my clinical practice, when a child was removed, it felt like as much as a system, as individual clinicians, we wanted to support that mother, there wasn't necessarily a system to support them, and they often were so devastated and traumatized by the child removal that we didn't see them again. And I felt like I wanted to investigate whether this was something that was happening in other jurisdictions, and to also just understand what we could do about it to solve the problem.
Sophie, this is something, of course, that had been mentioned in the MMIWG report, the impact that taking a woman's child has on her, the devastation it causes, the spiraling it causes. This is something that I think we've known for a long time anecdotally. People have said this, have warned of this. We're now seeing it in hard fact research. Sophie, what does that mean for advancing this conversation?
Well, it underscores the concerns that were coming from the Indigenous community for many, many years, as you've stated. And I think what was important, why this particular piece of research really adds to what's there, is that it comes from Megan's life experience. She's there on the streets, she's there helping the women, and then she's seeing the effects of the children being taken away from their mothers, and in many instances what has led to the mother being in the circumstances she's in is poverty. And it's also having been herself in the child welfare system. That we're going on like the third generation of just constant, it's like the proverbial revolving door, and something desperately needs to be done. We have a tremendous investment that we make in keeping children in the child care system, as opposed to supporting families, supporting those women when they need that support so that they can raise their children and keep their children out of the child welfare system when they grow up to be mothers themselves.
Sophie, another question for you. Why do you think it is that it's not a shortage of money. There's a lot of money that goes into this child welfare system. So it's not a monetary issue, but why do you feel that the money is, the powers that be choose to invest the money in the apprehension and the keeping and the warehousing of the children, as opposed to preventing the apprehensions? I'm curious to your thoughts of why. And it's not just, it's not non-Indigenous people doing it. We're hearing more and more. These are Indigenous agencies that are doing the exact same that non-Indigenous agents have been doing to Indigenous kids forever.
That is just such a loaded question. There's so many points that I want to hit on with that. First of all, it is not an issue of the lack of investment. It's how we invest. The money comes from the government. Governments have very short time frames. It goes from one election to the next. And so that's the planning that goes into it. That does nothing for supporting a family. So yes, there are Indigenous people, including my own nation, where we worked very hard to take over our child welfare system. And we started that in the 80s. We have like 30 years experience in this. And we end up with having similar problems because the system that we want to build ends up not being the system that we can implement, because the funding requirements, the investment principles are to invest in the problem, not in the solution. And that's where we need to take advantage of this possibility of new legislation, and see if we can move away from this whole thought about supporting once the problem exists, as opposed to preventing it right from the beginning.
Yeah, we had a hunger striking great grandma on last week's shows talking about there's not fixing this system. We can't fix our systems because our system is based on flawed logic. We need to get back to traditional ways of how we view childcare, and that sounds like what you're saying. Okay, Sophie, I've waited probably too long to ask for. Let's discuss the findings. So give us some of the highlights. What did this find? I mean, it's all. I mean, it's good news, I suppose, in that it validates what people have been saying, but it's awful. Horrible news, what this study found. Oh, sorry, Megan.
Okay, great. No problem. Yes, I mean, it was very difficult to read the results, really, when we saw them coming in. So what we found was among about 700 mothers that we interviewed and surveyed, 40% reported having had a child removed from their care by the state, which is really unacceptably high. And then of those women, in a sort of separate question, we found also really high rates of overdose. And so we wanted to understand, so about 35% of those women who'd overdosed, were they more or less likely to overdose sort of if they'd had a child removed. So we controlled for other factors that are common with overdose and still found that child custody removal was directly associated with a 55% increase in the odds of unintended overdose.
55% increase in the odds of an unintended overdose just from having your child taken from you.
Yes. And that was after we controlled for other common factors like interactions with corrections and homelessness, poverty, other things. But really, actually, what was most distressing was that among Indigenous mothers, that child custody removal doubled the odds of unintended non-fatal overdose. So they were sort of over two times more likely to overdose if they'd had their children removed, which is not at all surprising given what we've just discussed about the impact of ongoing colonial legacies and residential school, but also the fact that we now have more children in child custody than we ever had in residential school.
There's policy recommendations. Give us a rundown of what those are, Megan.
I think key is following on Sophie's great leadership, and what she's mentioned is that families need to be supported to stay together, and that takes significant investment. And it's not more money; it's actually probably cost saving, but it's in a different cost center. It's early childhood education, it's homelessness, addressing poverty for families. Really large scale systematic transformation is what we're calling for, and that's probably maybe longer term. But these children can't wait, and these mothers can't wait. And in the context of the fentanyl crisis that we have right now and the overdose crisis across this country, we also need immediate short-term support for mothers. So when a child, and many would argue, we didn't have the opportunity to interview men, but I think fathers as well. I think this is equally devastating for fathers. So having a child removed from the family is so traumatic. We need to wrap supports around that family if there has to be a removal, but removal should really be the last resort.
Well, all these agencies always say that removal is the last resort, and we wouldn't be doing story after story after story after story after story here at APTN if that was in fact the case. We hear this so often that it infuriates me. And you go to these agencies' websites and they all say that, and it's like, just stop, just be honest about what you're doing. Stop with this, because it's not true. The number of kids in care, more than at the height of residential schools, is proof that this isn't true. Sophie, last question to you. Where do you want to see this? This is important work. Where do you want to see it go, and how do you want to see it be used?
The work that Megan has done, as I said, supports what we know in our communities. And we do have the opportunity now with the new legislation, federal legislation. But what I'm afraid is going to happen with that federal legislation is that it's going to be sucked in to the existing system, and we mustn't allow that to happen. That what we need we don't need more social workers here being brought into our communities. What we need is to be supporting the systems that are there of keeping families together, supporting grandmothers so that they can support other grandmothers, that they can support their children and their grandchildren, supporting aunties and uncles, like the family units, supporting those in the communities. And that's not just the reserve community where I live, but it's more importantly in the community where Megan has been doing all of her good work, down in the downtown east side in Vancouver, whether it's Vancouver or Winnipeg or wherever, those there's the communities are needed to are the ones that need to have the support, as opposed to bringing in yet more psychologists and and others. I mean, there is a need for that, yes, but that can't be the only thing we do. We need to support the communities to be able to put that blanket around the family.
Incredibly wise words. I thank you for that, Sophie. I thank both of you. I really loved speaking to both of you. It sounds like you're kind of on the same page as a lot of the people that we talk to on this show, and yet we just don't see the change happening yet. But hopefully, like you said, Sophie, that Bill C-92 is an opportunity that we're going to see a shift. I guess we wait and see. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to reiterate some of the recommendations that come from that very important research, they want that there should be support for families to keep them all together if possible, large-scale systemic transformation and decolonized approaches to mothers' rights. Those who've had children removed, they need immediate wraparound supports, and better training for social workers and health professionals to understand and support Indigenous mothers. Well, we are all out of time. Thanks to my incredible guests for sharing. Thanks to you for watching. This wraps up our 2-week look into the child welfare system here on InFocus. I'm Melissa Ridgen. See you back here next week. We'll be talking about a need for traditional family law, not colonial courtrooms, for divorcing Indigenous parents. If you've missed anything on InFocus lately, you can watch or listen, as a podcast, aptnnews.ca/podcast. Have a great afternoon.